In the meantime, I'm going to bring in our panel, Spencer Brown and David Carlucci, to discuss where we are today. And gentlemen, let me begin with you, David. We've talked a great deal about diplomacy and foreign relations. Let's talk a bit about the economy and the economics of this particular trip. In massive numbers, frankly, David, anytime you're talking about $600 billion here, $140 billion there, $1 trillion. You have to give the president credit. Like him or don't, he's certainly making it rain, as they say.
Well, I hope so. But look, a lot of media reports have questioned those numbers if the president is exaggerating, and many think that he is. But regardless, we're talking big dollars. So this is smart to focus on economic issues. My concern, like many, is that it might be an over-reliance on the economics instead of traditional diplomacy, where we care about the human capital, about the long-term costs. And many critics, including myself, are concerned about this over-reliance on these economic deals. And of course, we know the perception, unfortunately, is that the Trump family has many deals in the countries that the Trump administration is visiting on this trip. Eric Trump was in Dubai just a week earlier talking about the Trump organization putting up an 80-story tower right in Dubai. So those are concerns. And look, with diplomacy, what's the cost, right? We're talking about dollars and cents, yes. But you can't measure the cost of bringing peace to the region. And that is what I'm concerned about, as many are, is that Donald Trump is just very concerned about the economics, as we all should be, but almost an over-reliance on that it's driving the policies, and that it's not diplomacy about pushing back on authoritarian leaders. Donald Trump was very critical of Hillary Clinton back when the Clinton Foundation had accepted money from some of these nations like Qatar. And Trump at the time argued that they were authoritarian leaders and not treating women, gays, and others appropriately. And those are words right out of Donald Trump's mouth. So this is concerning, and I'm hopeful that there's not this over-reliance on just a quick dollar and more on the long-term diplomacy and peace and stability in the region and what it means for Israel and our strongest allies.
Let me bring you in on this, Spencer. David makes, I think, a solid point in that there are corners of concern for some who feel very strongly that anytime you're dealing with dollars, you don't want to have a circumstance where you're self-dealing. And yet, if you look very carefully at where this country has been and frankly, the global economy, I would think every dollar you can wrangle is a good deal. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, this, as we've seen just yesterday in the speech and the other meetings and the outcome of those meetings, this is Trump the deal maker, which is one of the main reasons I think a lot of his supporters like him, and the success that's come from that, I think, speaks for itself. You know, when you look at these deals, it is diplomacy of a certain kind. In his speech yesterday, Trump talked about commerce, not chaos, being sort of the trademark of the Middle East. And if you look at what sort of whatever you may consider stereotypical diplomacy in the past has done, it hasn't really worked, right? We're still dealing with this problem, these many problems in the Middle East. And so I think it's worth the American people, and the reason they elected him, is giving him a shot at trying this sort of a plan. And obviously it worked somewhat with the Abraham Accords and normalizing relations with Israel in his first term. I think also critically, what these deals are doing is actually sticking it straight to these authoritarian countries that Trump has always spoken out against. You know, that's true. He does not like these countries for the way that they treat their people, and he's been a leader on that front. And so look at who he's sticking it to. Whether it's investment in Saudi Arabia, that's taking potential investment opportunities away from China and Russia and other countries that we are opposed with. Whenever the rest of his diplomacy has done the same thing. I mean, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, did a great deal down in Panama and also got China out of there. So you're able to use business, which is one of Trump's strong suits, in order to achieve these diplomatic goals. I think that's why the American people elected him again, because they wanted good deals, no more bad deals, as he would say.
Before we unpack, you know, your comment there about China, which I think is a valuable one, I'm going to give you a chance to sort of address something that David pointed out, you know, the potential hypocrisy, this idea of what the president used to say about Hillary Clinton and making deals and sort of, you know, changing cash and favors. That's been a criticism I've read about. How do you answer that?
Well, when it comes to this issue, obviously President Trump has been a businessman for years, and I would note that he's one of the few presidents, perhaps the only president, who actually left his first term in office with less personal wealth than he entered with. And so this is not about enriching himself or his family. Obviously, the family business is free to continue doing businesses and deals, but the president, like every president, has had to divest from these things. And I don't recall there being too much concern about all of the donations that were flowing into things like the Clinton Global Initiative right after they left office, or any real concern about the Biden family's deals. Obviously,
Trump mentioned it quite a few times.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was saying that Trump had mentioned it over and over again when he was running back in 2015, 2016. It's well documented. So it is a major shift, and it does question some of these priorities. And back to the Abraham Accord, the big problem here is we're still not addressing the Palestine issue. And some would argue that it has led to more hostile and violence in the region. And the fact that we could just go there and cherry pick some of these issues that we want to focus on. Meanwhile, we have a major issue in Gaza, not going to Israel and not talking about any of these issues and wanting to just talk about a few investments here and there is very concerning. And look, he's got some time left on this trip. You mentioned maybe he'll take a surprise trip to Israel, or someone mentioned that on this broadcast this morning. I'm hopeful that is the case. But we've got some burning issues, and it's one thing to look at the world with rose-colored glasses, but it's another to get in and deal with the realities of our time. And it doesn't seem like Trump is taking that on, particularly in this trip.
Let me ask you, Spencer, and I hear what David is saying there, but I think it's also fair to point out you can walk, talk, and chew gum at the same time. And if there is an Israel stop on this particular trip, that's certainly something that can be addressed, which is not to diminish David's point. But I do think it's interesting, this idea of really boxing out, to use a basketball analogy, China and to a lesser extent Iran by having these deals, because that's really where you'll make an advancement, not just economic ties, but perhaps security ties for the long term.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of, the rose-colored glasses comment, I think the Biden administration was not very realistic about what the situation was on the ground there, who the players were, what they were intending to do, how they were getting their money and their funding and taking orders. And the Trump administration is far more realistic about that. And we saw some of that in his speech yesterday when he was talking more again about the no mercy policy that he would employ to anybody who threatened the United States or its interests or its allies in the Middle East. But these deals are really important because if you look and compare the first Trump term to the Biden term to now it's being implemented, the first Trump term had this maximum pressure campaign where you had these Iranian proxy terrorist organizations in the Middle East basically hat in hand begging anyone for money because Iran just could not support them anymore. Then Biden comes in, takes office, gets rid of maximum pressure campaign, delists the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, and look at what that did. In terms of what sort of an outlook for the Middle East is successful, it's definitely Trump's by comparison.